here, this part is about photography being used to identify the typical look of a criminal. As an anthropologist, I know that similar things have been done throughout Europe and the rest of the world in the late 19th century, early 20th century. The image of the criminal, why are they doing it? It's for propaganda reasons. Now, this image was common, now not this picture, but the image of the criminal as this fierce-looking man. He's a female criminal over there, sort of. You see the blank stare also. Now, why did they do this? Why did they do this? They did this because imagery affects the brain. And imagery also affects how you relate to one another and how you relate to yourself. So let me give an example to you. Let's say that the image that you received of Japanese folks are people wearing samurai clothes. Let's say that's the only image you received of Japanese people throughout your lifetime. And this is the only image that people around you received. So anytime you mention Japanese, is that image of this guy wearing a samurai sword that comes up. So you relate to them based on the image you were exposed to concerning them. But what if samurai were just a part of Japanese society in the past, but they were not all of it? What if there was more to it? So when did you hear about, let's say it was the late 19th century, and you only heard about Japanese in terms of samurai, then in the late 19th century, you hear that the Japanese have their own navy, they have railways over there, and now you think, what? That's samurai folks? Samurai people? In the late 19th century, Japan modernized swiftly. So how the Japanese lived changed. So in the West, new images emerged of Japanese folks, and because they also had photography there, which they've imported, now you see Japanese warlords who dress like European monarchs. And now they use European titles there also. So now the image of the Japanese changed. Now, using imagery to control the perception of people, it's what pagans have done throughout history. And pagans throughout history, they used this method of controlling perceptions against believers. Yes, they did. For example, you can have someone that claims to be a believer, but they're a crook. They're not really a believer. They're just, he can be just a false teacher that uses the name of Christ to exploit people. And then in the news, they would report that some Christian congregation exploited children, for example. That term, Christian and exploitation of children, that's put in a newspaper, and you see the image of traumatized kids. That image remains in your brain, and your brain captures the tag Christian and abuse. So if such things are done over and over again, you're going to associate abuse of kids or abuse of human rights with Christian, and with Christian, with associated the Bible, associated Christ. That's how they condition you to be anti-Christ. Even though deep down inside you know that this individual only used the name of God in vain, you still have this association that's against Christ, that's developed by the perception that has been shaped for you. You didn't shape perception, it was shaped for you. Why is it important to know this? It is because believers need to be active on this front also. Because the enemy is waging a war he knows he will lose. He can only get some more reprobates with them to the lake of fire, but nevertheless, during his lifetime, even those who don't turn out to be reprobates, he will hinder us as much as possible. And he will use the perception of the public to control believers. Hence, you notice that often, when believers talk about things like homosexuality, they need to apologize, saying that they don't intend to harm or that they're not against homosexuals. Why do they need to do that? Why? Because you have this perception of believers as people that want to kill homosexuals out there. Why? Because that's what the media has been promoting. So that image exists of believers out there. And that image now is now affecting people's behavior. So anytime someone says that they follow Christ, then automatically people assume that you have some conspiracy to kill all homosexuals. Why? Because that is the perception that's been established in society. So as a believer, it affects you. Even though you're not involved in that perception, even though that perception may have nothing to do with you, it affects you. The same way, if you have someone that has Negro features and you place them on billboards and you associate them with poverty and Africa, if you do this over and over again, people are going to associate everyone with Negro features to be inferior, in poverty, and they can't take care of themselves. And this perception is going to affect how people with Negro features are treated. Let's say that you replace Negro with Jew, those white Jews, and you put them in the next category. You know how that worked out in the period before the Second World War. Okay, so controlling perceptions is how the pagans shaped the society after their will. Believers should be far more active in this than pagans are, but believers often rely on the pagans to represent them well. And that will not work out well because those pagans, they don't worship Christ, they don't have the Holy Spirit, so how can you seriously expect them to represent you well? They can't. Even if they intend to, they can't because they're not in line with Christ. Why is it that some brands in the world want to use white women? Well, those figures tend to be women, some transgender, but why do they often use white women as the sex symbols for their products? Because it will generate a sexual association with their product. And they often want light-skinned women because in the world you have this heritage of white supremacy that's been enforced in the 19th century that's still lingering around. So by using white females, they will trigger you to associate that gratification with their product. So when you begin to associate that sexual gratification with their product, it will trigger a desire in you to purchase that product. So they control the perception of their product. Why am I telling you all of this? Because these things are practical and pagans are using this in their advantage, and the enemy uses those pagans against believers. Let me say like this: to be born again, you just have to believe believe in Christ. Okay? You have to believe the gospel. To be renewed in your mind, you need to align yourself with Christ. To have an impact and be dominant on the earth, you need to have knowledge how things work. And pagans have knowledge how things work, and they're using it, and then the enemy uses them against believers. Believers ought to be the ones active. Look, as long as believers tolerate the enemy to control the perception people have of us, we'll be in trouble. And often churches, those pagan churches, they are part of it because they tell believers, no, as a believer, you should be extra careful what you do because people will blame you. No. Believers should not carry the weight of the world on them. We carry the yoke of Christ, which is easy, which is beneficial. That's what the world needs. We shouldn't carry the weight of the world. But believers have been taught that the world has a wrong perception of us, which is created by pagans, and now we need to carry the weight of that perception to appease folks. No, it shouldn't be like that. That would mean that if someone accuses you of being that means that when someone is conducting a smear campaign on your behalf, now they need to carry the weight to prove that what they're saying is not true. No, if they are carrying out a smear campaign against you, they should be the one offering the evidence. If they can't offer evidence and people fall for it, then they are messed up in their head also. You should not carry that weight. But okay, I don't want to make this video too long. Just realize that believers need to be active on this front. Keep agreeing with Christ and be at peace.